All right, I'd like to bring this committee back from its little short recess. Chrissy, if you could read the next item into the record, we'd appreciate it.
Ordinance 2015-0010, an ordinance amending sections 113.01, 301.02, 303.01, and 303.04 of the Cuyahoga County Code, and enacting section 303.07 of the Cuyahoga County Code to establish procedures by which the Personnel Review Commission adopts its administrative rules and to make various changes to the County Civil Service Code.
All right, thank you very much. This has been in this committee for some time. I apologize that it did not move as quickly as most items do in this committee, but we do have some conversations going on in regards to the prosecuting law department as well as the county's law department. So I'd like to bring those gentlemen up before us and let us know where they are, and whoever wants to speak first, I'll let Triazi
Thank you,
go.
Madam Chair. Thank you. You are correct. I made a commitment to the council president, to the members of this body, that we would engage in dialogue to see if we could not collaborate together to work toward resolving those issues that there was a difference of opinion on. During the course of the last couple months, actually, that we have been actively engaged in that dialogue. I really am grateful to Ed Morales from our office in law and Charlie Hannon from the prosecutor's office for the amount of time and effort made rolling up their respective sleeves, engaging both the administration and the PRC in dialogue to determine what areas that we could reach consensus. And I can report to you that as a result of those conversations, most everything that was in there was a difference of opinion on, have been merged. There have been resolution. There's some small outstanding issue that we're still waiting to see whether or not we can agree on. But what we have to present to you today is the results of those conversations, so that what would be before you would be a consensus presentation, which would in all likelihood, from a practical standpoint, result in a substitute a resolution for your consideration that you would know that would have been the collaborative effort of both the administration and the PRC. So I'll turn it over to the folks that have been doing the heavy lifting on this to walk you through they've been through it line by line, but we provided a summary of those areas that we think need your attention. But I'm happy, and I just want to thank both Ed and Charlie publicly here for the effort that they made to meet the council president and your desire that we work in collaboration. So.
Communication, that's what happens when we have longer dialogues. So I'll let you two gentlemen decide who wants to go next.
Ed Morales for the Law Department. I should point out the Law Department prepared a summary of the agreements that we've been able to reach with the Personnel Review Commission through the efforts of Mr. Hannon of the prosecutor's office. And the document that you see before you, again, was prepared by the Law Department. With regard to the paragraph headings intent, I think there's substantial agreement between the parties as to the intent of the proposed changes, but if not, the language there reflects what the Law Department was intending in proposing the language that will be included in the new substitute ordinance that will be presented hopefully at the next meeting when the parties have finalized their agreement on all issues. So the first issue had to do with the placement of the language with regard to the requirement that the PRC would submit its rules to council for review to determine whether or not those rules are in compliance with the human resources ordinances of council. And we have reached an agreement that language will be included in the Administrative Procedures Ordinance in Section 113.02, if acceptable to council. really the intent excuse me, the original dispute was whether or not that language would be included in Title III. And our overriding concern was to make sure the language was incorporated in a place that gave it the best legal foundation with regard to the charter language. But to the extent that there is no challenge from the PRC and there's agreement on the part of the PRC that the rules will be reviewed by council, we felt it unnecessary to press on that issue. With regard to the changes that would be in 11302, again, the intent is that the Personnel Review Commission would submit its rules to council for review. We've talked about a 45-day process. Madam Chair, I understand from you that, based on our conversation this morning, that you would prefer a 60-day period. I didn't know that. And so we'd be happy to offer that modification at your request. And that review period could be extended by either council or the assigned committee of council, namely this committee. And then the next section, 301.02, just to make clear that the administrative roles of the PRC cannot supersede an ordinance of council. The next set of amendments are intended to more closely reflect, the change in the heading is intended to more closely reflect the actual language of that section, and also to clarify that only those sections of Chapter 124 of the revised code and the corresponding provisions of the Ohio Administrative Code that are intended to apply to Ohio counties are intended to apply to Cuyahoga County. The changes in Section 303.04 get to the issue of the need for the PRC or the desire of the PRC to be notified of unclassified appointments, and so the parties have agreed that that would occur, and that we would adapt the notice provisions of ORC 124.12 regarding unclassified appointments. And finally, the intent of the law department, we want to make sure that the PRC understands this, is that the rules adopted by the PRC in December of 2014 and early 2015 regarding the creation of unclassified positions are superseded by this language. And then finally, we've included a provision on subpoenas to provide a sound legal foundation for the issuance of subpoenas by the PRC to carry out its adjudication function. So I don't know if Charlie would like to add anything.
If I could, please. Charles Hanna with the Prosecutor's Office. Before addressing the substance of what we've been discussing, I do want to commend the administration, including the Chief of Staff and the Law Director, who made time to meet with the PRC and our representatives in order to talk through some of the issues that we had. I think one of the problems that the PRC has faced since its creation has been a lot of misperceptions about what it does, what its role is. And I think the communication that has been ongoing between the administration and the PRC has been very beneficial to correcting some of those misperceptions. I will say our work is not done. I think there is still some progress that we need to make, but I believe we have at least made forward progress in trying to resolve some of the disagreements that existed, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we are on the right track. With regard to the summary that you were given today, I was given this shortly before the meeting today as well, and I do want to emphasize that this is the creation from the Law Department, and that when it indicates that the terms that have been agreed upon, I want to be clear, we've circulated proposals between ourselves as recently as yesterday. The Personnel Review Commission has its next meeting tomorrow, at which time we intend to present what we've discussed to the Personnel Review Commission to obtain their authorization for it, that they agreed to this. So it might be a little premature to say that these terms have been agreed upon. I'm cautiously optimistic that what we've discussed here will be approved in large part, but there, as Mr. Triazzi indicated, there are some side issues that were raised yesterday that we need to talk through and see if we can reach a resolution as to those. And I don't want to go through all the provisions of what has been laid out in the Law Department summary. I do want to note, though, that with regard to the provision in what is being proposed as an amendment to Section 113.02 of the Administrative Procedures Act, where there is a provision made for a 45-day review period. We received indications earlier on in the process that 45 days would probably be sufficient time in order for there to be a determination whether or not a proposed administrative rule was inconsistent with any provision of the code or any ordinance passed by the council. And the provision, at least as drafted, does indicate or does include a little alternative that in the event that 45 days is not sufficient, that there is a mechanism for the committee to extend that period of time, which we think is reasonable. And I understand just prior to the meeting today that there had been a discussion of 60 days as being something for consideration. I would say that has not yet been presented to the Personnel Review Commission, so I'll need to make them aware of that. But our recommendation would be that the 45-day period, I think, ordinarily should be more than enough time to determine whether or not a proposed administrative rule is inconsistent with any provision of the code, particularly with the mechanism that is in place, at least in the ordinance proposed to extend that. And I will not belabor the point further as far as what the law department discerns the intent of the provisions to be. I think that the terms of the ordinance will speak for itself, and I'm confident that when it's presented, I think it will be readily apparent what the objective of the provisions are. It is correct with regard to the placement of the provision for the administrative procedures or administrative rules proposed by the Personnel Review Commission. It does make much more sense to have that included under the administrative procedures section of the code rather than under Title III, which is one of the reasons why we strongly advocated for that. And I'm grateful that we've at least appear to have reached a resolution on that. I won't belabor any further points. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have, but I do want to emphasize our appreciation to the administration and the law director and his staff for taking the time to listen to us so that we can better understand what their concerns are, and hopefully they can better understand what our concerns were, and that we can work towards a resolution of these issues. Thank you.
Okay, I want to speak to the matter of the 60 days, and I might have to ask Rebecca to come up for a minute, because there was a conversation that we had in a meeting in regards to taking that back to the commissioners, that I felt that the 60-day, and the only relation that I had with the 60-day is to keep the charter in line with all the appointments and all the timeframes of 60 days, and just wondering if you had a chance to take that to the commissioners yet.
I have not yet, Councilwoman. We have not had any additional dialogue about any of these ongoing discussions since the last time we reported to your committee, so we have not.
Okay, thank you. Any of my colleagues have any specific feelings toward the 45 days that have been agreed upon with them versus the 60 days that I'm proposing? Councilwoman Brown?
The question I have is, it gives the council the authority to extend that 45 days, right? But it doesn't clarify the extent of the extension, if you will. So would that be an additional 45 days? Or is that still part of the question on the table?
The way I would read it is that it would depend on the will of council or the committee at the time. So you'd make an ad hoc determination as to how much additional time you need. It's
For that
left open to
particular
you.
item that's being voted upon?
Yes.
All right. Any other feelings in regards to that? Germana?
I'm just wondering if any of these changes that we're talking about is going to be in the form of a resolution?
No, they will be presented as a substitute amendment, ordinance.
Ordinance.
Yes, changes, amendments to the existing the existing ordinances, the existing code.
So I'm just trying to figure that the 3 readings, if we wanted this to go to 3 readings, if the 45 would be enough. So I need to figure that out.
Oh, as to the 45-day provision, when council when that would come into play would be for when council is reviewing the administrative rules that are submitted by the Personnel Review Commission. So, and it would not, there would be no need for an ordinance at that point. You would be considering a resolution to approve the rules.
And in the past, we've had different dates, and we had initially a 30-day period, and everybody was, between the administration and the council, were going okay until one side decided not to play ball, so to speak. So we have initially moved it to 60 days when we talked about appointments. So I just kind of like that 60-day, it's conducive to what's in the charter already. We have 60 days. It may not be extended after that period. We have a flat-out 60 days, and so just that's basically my thought process. Right now, it's stating 45 days, and that period may be extended. All right,
Madam Chair.
Councilman Miller.
I think there is merit in having consistency in the way we do the appointments and the way we do these reviews, and I can live with it either way, but my preference would be for 60 days, and without any specific mention of extension. I mean, it could always be extended by council action, even if it's not so stated. But I think that not having any provision for extension would kind of make a strong statement that we expect it to be done in 60 days. So that would be my preference. And Madam Chair, may I ask a question on another subject?
Yes, you may, Councilman Miller.
Okay. I know that we're not totally yet at 100% agreement on all issues, but let's suppose that we get there, and that we have an ordinance that the administration and the PRC fully agrees to. I would be interested in the opinion of the 2 presenters, since I'm the chairman of the Operations Committee, which considers these things. To what extent would this agreement alleviate the need for a charter amendment regarding the roles and duties of the PRC?
You want to go first?
Thank you, Councilman. That's a tough question. We've tackled these issues separately. We understand that the proposed charter amendment was lurking out there, but because it was not going to be occurring this year, we felt we would make better progress, I think, addressing the issues at hand, which was the issues arising from the ordinance. And I'm cautiously optimistic that by the communications and discussions that we've had between the administration and the PRC, that that may lessen the impetus for a need to proceed with a charter amendment if we're able to reach some kind of resolution. And maybe it is not in the form of agreed language in an ordinance like that, but there had been some talk about a memorandum of understanding of some kind. And I think that's an issue that we can take up at some point. I think it may be premature, certainly from my point of view, to predict what would happen as far as that goes. But I would say that I think the discussions that we've had between the administration and the PRC and the time they've taken to have those discussions, and as I indicated earlier, the chief of staff, the law director and his staff, I think has been a positive development that I would hope would maybe make that kind of process unnecessary. But I can only speak from the perspective of the PRC and where we are today on that. So
Madam Chair, if I could just add briefly, because I really appreciate the question, Councilman. Charlie's right. I mean, the very first conversation that brought us to the table to discuss this ordinance, the very first thing that he and I decided is that we were going to put that discussion aside, that we were going to discuss this, see if we could develop the mechanism to create that dialogue. The commitment I alluded to, however, at the outset of this hearing, when I said I made a commitment to the council president and to this body that we would engage in that dialogue, also applies to the charter amendment. Once we're through this, we will see what we've learned, see what's left, see what we need to to continue to work through. And not being able to answer your question here today, I want you to be completely aware that the commitment was made and I intend to deliver on it. We will roll up our sleeves and see if we can't reach some consensus. If there is an amendment, that we would be on the same page. If there's another mechanism that we could do to resolve those issues, we will employ that. But the ground rules for this initial discussion was we were going to put that aside for the moment.
Well, that makes sense, and I don't anticipate work being done on my committee on charter amendments until we finish the budget process and get into next year. So we have some time, but I'm always thinking down the road and trying to get a handle for what the environment might be. So I appreciate that commitment, and we would certainly be most pleased if a consensus position were developed on that subject. So we wish you well in your work.
Thank you, Councilman.
All right, any other comments or anything? All right, and so the PRC, of course, was just given this document as well as us. We will go over it individually as a committee. Triazi, just wondering if we, the end of the year is approaching. My goal for this committee is to have it out, at least from this body, passed on to the full council. So looking at the calendar, we all have budgets ahead of us. My initial next committee would be Election Day, and I know that I can't have a committee on Election Day, so that pushes us to November 17th. Is there something that, I don't know what's not in here until I compare with the other summary that have been given me, but can we all agree that the 17th we can come to some final decision on whatever is left out? You have a commissioner meeting tomorrow, and we all want to have a nice holiday. We want to put this to rest. So the 17th, I'm expecting that we have all final, everything in front of us so we can vote.
We'll work to meet that expectation.
Is that good? Yeah. And if not, if something, some act of something happens, please reach out to me and let me know if that's not it. All right, with no other further questions in regards to this, we don't need to vote on it. We will just keep it in the HR committee. Presentation is going to be given by the Personnel Review Commission, and we're gonna get a progress. Just to let the committee know, I meet on a regular basis, I believe once a month, with Rebecca, and she informs me of what's going on with the commissioners, any questions or concerns, and we talk about our side, if there's any questions and concerns. And the only thing that's basically been coming from our side lately is pay equity, pushing for that. And I think later on today, we will, this week or whatever, as it goes out, the budget will roll out an administrative's pay equity step in that right direction, which is I'm really proud of, and I'm sure Mike is. He's pushed pay equity right along with me. And then we'll get a plans report on some questions in regards to the airport positions that were deleted. So Rebecca?
Thank you, Chairwoman Conwell. We are here at the request of the Chairwoman this morning, but we're very grateful for the opportunity to come forth and show you some of the information that we're going to share with you today. We gave you a letter about a month ago that provided you quite a few details about our work and our accomplishments since we started the 2 new operational realms this year of administering the civil service testing program and the class and comp administration. But we are going to give you a little bit of insight into where we see ourselves over the next few years, how we're planning to move forward to fulfill the rest of our obligations under the county charter. Before we go too far down this path, I would like to give you just a little bit of background on what informs our understanding of the role of this agency. And I know that this continues to be a subject of dialogue between the administration and the PRC, so I don't want to delve too far into this, but I do want to let you know that beyond charter language in Section 9 that lays out the details of our authority and our responsibilities, we also look at the charter preamble because it includes some information about goals for the new county government, and we feel it's critical for the PRC to be able to demonstrate the relationship between those goals for the new county government and our work as an agency in order to be a contributing member of the new government. We also have spent quite a bit of time looking at the transition team documents that came out of the work of the people who were involved before the new county government was established. And we've looked back a little bit at the role of the Ohio Department of Administrative Services because in years back, they did a lot of this work for the county. The administration of class plans and civil service testing and ensuring that civil service civil service rules were being followed around the state. That was the work of the Department of Administrative Services. So we just wanted to share with you how we have come to understand what our role is. I mentioned these goals of the new government, and I'm just going to read through them briefly because we'll circle back to these at the end of this presentation. But basically, this the charter lays out that the main goal of the new government was to become an effective, I've lost the word, but it's right there in the forefront, to be basically an effective competitor in the local environment. But there are 6 specific goals that are identified: to have accountable leadership, to ensure necessary health and human services, to have collaborative leadership with public and private sector entities, an improved focus on equity for communities and citizens of the county, long-term regional and global competitiveness, and significant taxpayer savings through streamlining those other outside elected offices. At the end of our presentation, I'm going to show a clear relationship between the work that we're doing and how it really does contribute to these goals. We're going to take a moment to just share with you the vision and the mission statements that we've developed for our agency. Ultimately, our vision is an optimal workforce to serve the citizens of Calico County. We looked at the charter, tried to understand what the mission and vision should be and what it was intended to be from the people who wrote this into the charter, and then we've developed our mission statement to incorporate some of the values that we've established for ourselves. So our mission then is to contribute to the county's efforts to attract, select, retain, and reward an optimal workforce to serve the citizens through our commitment to integrity, efficiency, and continual improvement. This is what drives us. in our operations. We're going to go through this program, this presentation this morning, from a chronological perspective. This doesn't necessarily align with the way that our authority and our responsibilities are laid out in the charter, but this is how we've addressed them as we've been in business. So to go back and look originally at the first effort that we addressed when we came into office and when the commissioners came aboard in 2011, and then I came into my position late in 2011, was to address the appeals. And we had 48 pending at the time that we started. We have continued to receive appeals to the point that we now have had 321 appeals filed with the agency, which is huge. I think to put that in context, what I understand from the county's operations before the new government, there were about 10 or 15 appeals a year that went to the State Personnel Board of Review. So this is a huge number of appeals that we have processed. Up until now, about 295 are resolved, 92% of them, and that is sort of where we've been hovering in terms of balancing the resolution of the pending docket against the incoming appeals. This continues to be.
You have a
Pardon?
councilwoman.
I'm sorry. That's since we started in 2011, right? Those 48 had been held in abeyance until I was brought on board and we started the process. But basically, to let you know, this portion of our work has decreased in terms of the resources that we're dedicating to this operation because this docket is largely resolved. The nature of appeals that were presented have changed significantly, pretty markedly, in fact. When the first appeals were filed with the PRC, and we had 140 of them in 2012, they were largely driven by the reorganization. So they were people who were appealing their reclassification assignments. Now what we're seeing is a trend toward more disciplinary actions being appealed, job audit decisions being appealed, and far less reclassifications. Oh, sorry, go back. The compliance piece of our work, this continues to be an ongoing subject for discussion between us and the administration, but we have made some forays into our responsibilities here. One of the first things that we did was back in 2013, we conducted an audit of the information that was in SAP regarding the non-classified employees. We wanted to be sure that the information that we were going to hand over to the consultant eventually for the pay equity study was intact and accurate. So that was one of our first endeavors. We did issue a report with some recommendations to the county executive at the time and the director of HR, and copied council on that so you were aware of what we had done in that endeavor. We also see the pay equity studies as part of our efforts to ensure compliance. That's clearly articulated in that list of responsibilities under 9.02. And the first study that we did prior to some of the people that are sitting here today, we were directed to do a pay equity study between the prosecutor and the public defender's office to ensure some equity and some parity between their offices. That was finished up, and I think in 2014, the recommendations came before you. And then we conducted the additional pay equity study last year for the county executive's policies. We also have a practice that.
Councilman.
Pardon? Sorry.
May I interrupt you for a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. It's regarding the appeals and particularly how many job audit appeals have you gotten?
I can't give you those numbers off the top of my head. I've got them, and I can get them to you very quickly once I get back to the office. But.
And do you have a sense for how long they typically take?
The appeals from the point that the appeal is filed to a hearing, or the resolution of the appeal?
Till a decision is made.
It takes some time. And this is one of the trends that we have noticed, in fact, that's driven us to change our plans for staffing to address this part of our operations.
The one complaint I get about PRC is it's two-pronged. It's that the job audit appeals go on forever, and the results are unsatisfactory, and the employees feel like they have a clear case and they don't get a positive result back, and so that's what I'm hearing.
Okay, and I appreciate that point. I want to clarify though, and this is a conversation that we have had numerous times with people about what's happening with the job audit process. There are two processes that happen, and the complaints that came out of the focus groups that were part of the pay equity study, there was confusion amongst the employees at that point in time too. The PRC does not do the job audits. The job audit requests go directly to the Human Resource Department. So I want to make sure that when people talk about the job audit process, that's not the PRC's operation. The PRC only deals with job audit decisions if they're appealed to the PRC. And we've actually had very few appeals that came out of those job audits. So I guess I question whether or not that assertion is actually about the appeals that the PRC is processing versus the actual job audit process.
Yeah, I would say that it relates to the process as a whole, that people don't feel the process really works, and I wouldn't narrowly apply it to either the HRD component or your piece of it.
I appreciate the concern. It's certainly something that you would like to have it addressed as efficiently as possible. And to the point that the appeals are part of our responsibility, we look at that all the time, and we're trying to get more creative about how we can move those things along.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So to the last bullet on this slide, the county had a practice in place under the previously permanently appointed HR director to provide us periodic reports, and this was worked out and had been working quite well, in fact, where if you have a copy of the charter, I believe in front of you, it was passed out. If you look at the bottom of the second page that lists those responsibilities that under the authority to ensure section, a number of those responsibilities were delegated to the Human Resources Department, and they continue to perform those operations today. What had been happening in the past was that Human Resources was providing us periodic reports about those different levels of operation. So we were getting reports about who was going through training, what training was being provided, how many people were participating. Ethics training reports were coming to us. We were getting numbers about the performance management participation and the training that was dedicated to helping the county's managers develop their skills for performance management. We're very much looking forward to the appointment of a permanent HR director or the chief talent officer, one way or the other, because we'd like that practice to resume. That's the one mechanism that we've been able to successfully use to ensure our responsibilities under that part of the charter. Glancing back at testing, to date, this has probably changed since we wrote this yesterday, but we've established 62 eligibility lists. That's an important number because it facilitates the county's hiring into those classified positions. But the other important thing for you to know is that has also resulted in 62 detailed position descriptions to support the use of valid, reliable, and professionally developed tests. We know that this part of our operations has been under quite a bit of criticism, and we understand it. We are completely sensitized to the frustration that occurs when people have to wait a long time to fill a vacancy. We are working every day to improve the efficiencies in our organization and to look for ways that we can step outside of our processes and look at why we're doing what we're doing and whether it makes sense for the county anymore. Albert, I don't know, have they received copies of the detailed descriptions? That I wanted to share an example with you because I think it's important for you to see the difference between what you've seen, which are proposed classification specifications when a new classification is created, and the kind of document that the testing team has been building to support the development and the administration of the tests that are happening. So the other thing that you should know is that many times an eligibility list is established as a result of multiple testing sessions. So in many cases, we have had more than one testing session to establish an eligibility list. And this is a factor, to be frank, about of the actual spaces that we have available to us to conduct testing. So we're limited to, I think, 32 or 36 people at a time in our current building. We do use the facilities here in this building as well when we can, and that increases our capacity a little bit, but we still do not have a large enough room to accommodate some of the testing needs that we have to address some of these bigger groups. The other thing we'd like you to see is that looking back at the number of applications that have been processed, so since we've been engaged in this administering the civil service testing part of this, the applications, there have been over 7,200 of them processed. Of that, we have seen about 45% of this is resulting in qualified applicants. We think that this presents an opportunity to peel this off a little bit and to look a little deeper into why that number isn't bigger. We don't know yet how that compares to industry standards, but we think it's important that it's an opportunity to look at how the county is recruiting, whether or not there's some modernization that can yield a more qualified applicant pool, so that the chances of the county being actually able to recruit the best and the brightest to work for it is increased. Glancing back, this is actually a chart that reflects our productivity in testing. And George Vaughn, our manager of employment testing, can give you some of the more detailed analysis that's available here. But I think the thing that jumps off at the page from this chart is that you can see when we actually started administering tests in March. Now, keep in mind that our first employment testing specialist came on board in January, so they were still in the process of developing the procedures and policies in-house that we needed to administer the tests. We started off with 3 people who worked diligently from March, April, May, and June. At that time, they were already facing a logjam, if you will, because we essentially took it over on day one without any gradual acquisition of duties. We took it all on at day one. And so it took some time to get out there and meet with all of the subject matter experts, all of the hiring teams and the departments, and to actually build the targeted, specific, job-relevant tests that the team wants to use to help the county meet its hiring needs. So you can see a couple of effects here. First of all, after a few months of operation, our productivity went up, and George likes to remind me that July number is probably an anomaly. We had a particularly lucky month that month, but we're hoping to be able to do 15 to 20 of these a month. At that rate, because there are 425 classifications, you can see that it's still going to take a couple years at this rate with the staff that we have in place to move forward to address the county's hiring needs. Glancing back a little bit about what the class and comp team is up again, these people too came on board in January, one in January and I think one later, quite a bit later this year. And one of the things that we wanted to be able to illustrate here was what's happened with the class plan as a result of the reorganization and the new government. This class plan has been in place at the county, was in place under the BOCC since 1994, had been maintained by the HR department through the end of last year. But the important thing for you to know is that this class plan has grown from 275 classifications to over 400 due to the specialized functions that were brought into the new county government that had to have new classifications developed. So that trend toward a more complex, a bigger class plan is somewhat out of line with what you see modern organizations doing with their hiring. In order for them to be more flexible, they're building broader systems rather than more finite systems. So we're watching this carefully and looking for opportunities to find places where it makes sense to broaden a classification again, to give the county's managers more hiring and more flexibility in the way that they're organizing and assigning work. But the point of this slide is to just illustrate that the class plan has grown significantly since we took on these responsibilities.
OEO stands for?
Pardon?
OEO.
Other elected officials. One of the things that we know that the class and comp team is up against is that there are 170 classifications still in operation today that are out of date. They have not been maintained. They're not, to the best of our knowledge, they're not compliant with some of the things that we need them to be compliant with. So we're moving forward to address that. That is slow, hard, laborious work, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of coordination with the hiring teams. This is work that necessarily involves the subject matter experts out in the department. So it might not seem like a lot to you, but for us to have presented recommended changes for 20 of these so far with only 2 people dedicated to this work, this is quite an accomplishment. It continues to remain at the forefront of our priorities for that group, because we know that ultimately what we'd like to do is get the PRC to the point that we're maintaining a classification system and that these things are reviewed consistently and periodically so that changes are done as on a rotating basis rather than to wait for the back to occur. One of the things that I want to convey to people about the PRC is that these systems, the classification system, what's happening with testing, the compensation, these are living, breathing, dynamic systems, and they have to be maintained carefully. So that remains a challenge for us and will for some time at the pace that we're able to address this. The other sort of more driving need at this point is that this team of 2 people is helping out with 8 different requests for reorganization and development of reclassifications or modifications of classifications. Those are more pressing, frankly, than the need to update some of these out-of-date classifications. So that work actually occupies quite a bit of their time. For example, one of the things that they're working on is there's a classification in the county called the program officer, and it has been sort of a catch-all classification. There are, I think, about 120 people across the organization in various levels of the program officer classification. We're finding that those jobs that are being performed within those classifications are sometimes very unique. We know, for example, in the justice services and public safety realm that we have somebody in the program officer position who's performing hazmat duties. We have another person in that classification who's a grant writer. Vastly different work. It needs probably independent classifications. So we're bumping up against that because while the requests for tests come in for those positions, we also need to develop new classifications. And we've had a little bit of conversation with the chairwoman about the process for creating a new job at the county and looking at some ways that we think that we can help to move that along. The other thing that I think is one of the things that we've been most proud of is we've been able to help the Planning Commission put together a pay plan that they wanted to implement to recognize and reward their performers. So it was a relatively small scale project, but it is something that we think our expertise was very valuable to them, and I think if you ever spoke to them, they would endorse that as well. The other thing that the class and comp team did early on was to identify job families, which had not been identified here at the county, and that we think are critical to understanding what the county needs to do to help its training, to provide opportunities for people to succeed in their careers and for them to understand what sort of career paths and also to support ultimately succession planning that goes on at the county.
Can I ask a question, since there's such a backlog? Instead of trying to do this with employees, is there subcontractors that you can hire to expedite getting these things done without having to have permanent employees do it?
I'm sure there are. We haven't looked at it yet. I can tell you that my personal experience is that those people are probably way more expensive than the employees that we're hired to do it, but we're certainly willing to look at it because we know some of this work is addressing a backlog. One of the things that we've done is we've brought in master's level interns, primarily from the University of Akron, who has an industrial psychology master's and PhD level programs. We brought them in to help support our work and to help do some of the grunt work, if you will, to do the job analysis, to do the meetings with the subject matter experts, to move things along. But I think we're looking at any viable option to move forward to get consultants or to get employees on board to address this work. We're open to just about anything. But ultimately the county's hiring managers are our customers, and our hands are tied in how well we can serve them at this point. So moving forward, and I'm going to speed this up a little bit because I see we're close to the noon mark here. We do have some principles that guide our planning. We would like to get from a reactive agency to a much more proactive, to anticipate some of the changes that are coming down the pike and have these systems in place and have them in place with procedures and policies that are flexible enough to support the changes that go on in any organization, and in particular in the county, because the county is subject to a lot of changing influences in the local market, that the local environment, not just the market, but the local environment in which it works. Funding changes, grants come available, things like that all impact how work is organized and how classifications work. So we want to get more proactive in how we do our work. We'd like to move you away from some of the more traditional civil service bureaucracy, look for ways that we can improve efficiency. We'd like to get away from using papers and pencils as much as we are today and start incorporating some more technology. We've taken small steps to do that, but we know that there's more out there that we can use. And ultimately, and this is years down the pike, way after the point that we've been able to satisfy satisfy all of the county's needs. But we do think that there is a capability here to add a regional component to our services, because every city, every village in the county operates under the same civil service practices that we do. They all need job descriptions, they do need job analyses. So that is part of our vision for the future. Focusing forward, in appeals, one of the things that we are anticipating, our numbers continue to drop off in terms of the number of new appeals that are filed, and we are anticipating that this will eventually return to the levels that were happening with the government here before it was reorganized, down to 10 or 15 a year. Now, this can be impacted, for example, if the county decides to reorganize one of its operational areas. So that's a best guess at this point. We're still relatively young into this, but we're anticipating that if the trend continues, that's where we're going to get down. One of the things that we're proposing in our budget request that you'll hear in a couple of weeks is that we've been watching the trends of productivity of our hearing officers, and I don't think we're moving in the right direction. We'd like to become more efficient, and I think the way that we see the opportunity for that to happen is for us to bring on a part-time hearing officer who's in-house, who we have a little bit more ability to put some parameters on in terms of their productivity than we have with these independent contractors. So that's one of the things that we're looking to do to increase efficiencies with the appeals moving forward. We also wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to remind council of this section of the charter. Section 9.025 says the PRC has authority for performing any other duties that as may deemed necessary by council for the Personnel Review Commission to carry out its mission and purpose. This is why we see the PRC as an arm of council, because we believe that we can help you accomplish some of your goals by exercising some of our strengths and bringing them to your service in the compliance realm. One of the things that we look at in terms of our compliance obligations is this list of things in 902. And just like with the pay equity study that council assigned to us through the budget document actually in 2012, we believe that there are other opportunities for council to use us to gather some of the information, analyze it, and get it back to you so that you can help to provide some of the checks and balances that were intended in the new form of government. Another one of our ideas going forward about compliance is not only do we intend to develop a protocol to report findings and recommendations to council and to the county executive, but also to seek opportunities to collaborate with the internal auditor when it makes sense. We did not have much of a relationship in place with the internal auditor when we did our first SAP audit. If we intend to do something like that again, we'd like to collaborate with them. They bring some competencies to the audit process that we don't have in-house, and we think that that's a natural alliance.
SAP stands for what? SAP?
I don't know actually what it stands for, but it's the county's Human Resource Information Service System.
Yeah.
So it's where all of the information about employees is housed, all of the data. Focusing forward in our testing, obviously the biggest thing that we're looking to do is increase the efficiency in establishing our eligibility lists. Right now, we're holding out these goals in front of the team, new classifications. We'd like to have an eligibility list in less than 60 days. Repeat classifications, we're expecting to be able to do that in 30 days or less. We've already done that in a couple of cases. We've had requests to fill vacancies in jobs that we've already analyzed and had tests in place for, so we were able to turn those around much more quickly, and that obviously that helps our overall numbers, but those remain goals for that team. We'd also like to be able to look at an opportunity to do what we need to with the rules to allow us to proactively establish eligibility lists, so that at any time that a hiring need evolves at the county, there's a list of qualified applicants that are ready to be hired from, so we can turn that over more quickly. We have to fix some things to get that done, but that's where we see this going. Also, we're looking to establish more, and this goes back to the point that I was making about the complexity of the class plan. We're looking to establish countywide eligibility lists for some of the more broadly used classifications. So a clerk, for example, we'd like to be able to open that up and have a test available for people as soon as a need arises in that classification. The testing team also needs to continue its collaborations with the classification and compensation team to address some of these unique problems that come up when we find, for example, that there's a testing need for a position in a classification that doesn't exactly fit. They work hand in hand together on a daily basis, and it's critical that that keeps going. Also, the one thing that the testing team would like to have the time and the opportunity to do is to develop some of the higher level assessments that we know could meet some of the county's needs to hire, for example, higher level managers, to look at assessment centers and work samples, additional things beyond the traditional tests that we're developing right now for the job knowledge and skills. We'd like to evolve our practices a little bit to serve the county's needs. And ultimately, and really, this is sort of the holy grail for testing. We know that there are places where we can analyze data between people's scores on their tests and ultimately their scores on a performance appraisal system. And ultimately, that's what the testing team would like to be able to do, to demonstrate the return on the investment that we're making in testing right now. Because if we're doing our job right, the higher scores on the civil service tests that we're administering are also going to be the better performers down the road. And it takes a long time to get that data established and enough data to make it credible, but that's our goal ultimately with some of the bigger classifications that we're dealing with. Focusing forward for the class and comp team, internal equity continues to be a priority for this team. It has been a priority for the commissioners for some time since we went through our first strategic planning process in 2013. We continue to reach out to the Human Resources Department to ask about the progress of what the administration is doing. We've been told and assured that they are going to be coming forward in a number of weeks to make a presentation to the PRC. This remains and will remain on the PRC's radar because under the charter it's one of our responsibilities and we intend to see it through. The class and comp team obviously is going to continue to review the outdated class specs to recommend changes and ensure compliance with professional and legal standards. We also need to develop some new procedures to support a more dynamic classification system. We're also looking at technological solutions. So one of the things that we do to gather job information is we send out paper forms and we ask them to download a paper form and fill it out. And then that has to come back to the team, and then they sit down with one form and they capture information from that, then they take the next one that comes in. There are technological solutions that we can be using. You know, SurveyMonkey, I understand, doesn't work with HHS at this point, but there are really simple, cost-effective solutions to really increasing the efficiency of these procedures. So we're going to continue to look for that, and we'll continue to make recommendations to move the county's practices forward. Using some of that new technology. We would like an opportunity to develop regular surveys of salary information from the local market because that's part of how you maintain a class system. And a comp system, you make sure that it's maintaining some relevance to the local labor market. That hasn't been done since these systems were first put in 1994. We also need, and I mentioned this earlier, we need to work closely with HR to talk about the process that we're using to create new jobs because we have to do something better. We're not meeting the needs of the county's hiring managers the way that it's working right now. So I'm going to circle back to the preamble and just give you a couple of examples of how we see ourselves moving the county forward. So employment testing contributes to accountable leadership because now we're ensuring that the people who are hired by the county are actually qualified. And not to say that they weren't before, but this is an assurance. Careful diligence to the county's pay practices supports equity and the county's competition for regional talent. Regular attention to the class plan increases efficiencies and contributes to increased taxpayer savings through efficiency. And finally, exploring regionalization opportunities with other public entities supports the goal of collaborative leadership. And that is a very fast summary of what we're doing and what we think we would like to do in the future. But very happy for the opportunity to be here today. Happy to answer any additional questions that you have.
In the interest of time, unless there's something really sticking out at you, we still have to hear a short, a very short presentation from Albert. So if you have any questions, you can follow up with Rebecca via email or myself.
Thank you very much.
All right. Albert, Mr. Bouchain. And I know I messed up your last name, so you know that's why I call you Albert.
I had to be reminded what I was presenting about. Thank you. Madam Chairman, you had asked about the airport classifications that we had removed from the ordinance that we had recommended deletion of. I reached out to the HR department and to through the Director of Public Works, through the HR department, and was informed that we can proceed with proposing deletion of the airport ops techs 1, 2, and 3, as those are bargaining unit positions, but that Director of Public Works would like to keep the airport manager and assistant manager as active classifications.
Okay, and I believe that that resolution was amended at that point.
It was. So the next time we come before you, you'll see the airport ops techs 1, 2, and 3 is proposed deletions.
Okay. So I just wanted the committee to have that update. All right, any further questions from any of our presenters? Hearing none? Meeting adjourned.
No, I think